What makes you drawn to chiptune, also called 8-bit music?
Initially, I was drawn to it because it was the music of my childhood, so there was a nostalgic component. And then also, I found it really easy, a really easy form factor to iterate on compositionally. It allowed me to focus on the writing and less so on the production aspect of it. And so that really allowed me to create a lot of music really quickly. And it was a good way to get started.
What is your creative process like when making music?
It varies, but generally, I like to take some time to experiment with sounds, maybe play the piano. I'm also interested in iterating on the creative process. So there are times where I'll try to turn everything on its head and try something different, whether it's using a different instrument or starting with a different instrument. But yeah, it depends on the project.
What kind of synthesizers and other instruments do you use?
I pretty much do everything in software, but I do have a bunch of guitars and a baby granite, an upright piano.
Are there any themes that you explore even though it is mostly instrumental?
Yeah. From project to project, the thematic exploration changes depending on, in the case of a soundtrack, it depends on what the story of the movie or the game is. Or it could be, a particular interest of mine at a particular time. Definitely I try to take time to do research and like look into new sources of inspiration. So it varies pretty dramatically. But in the case of like a film like It Follows, I, took a lot of inspiration from the reference material that we used, a lot of music by people like John Carpenter, or in the case of a game like, I don't know, Monsters Ate My Birthday Cake, which came out a long time ago, but that to me was sort of like my chance to pay tribute to Koji Kondo, who wrote a lot of my favorite video game scores, especially for games, series like Zelda and Mario. So yeah, it depends on the project, but definitely a lot of different inspirations.
What albums and EPs would you say you're proud of the most, especially film scores?
I'm not a huge fan of being proud of things, but definitely I can point to something like Under the Silver Lake, which was probably the hardest project I ever did. It took me over a year to make, and I had a lot of help. The reason it was so difficult is in part because it was my first real earnest opportunity to write music for a live orchestra. And we recorded a 50-piece orchestra. And having never really done that before, the learning curve was pretty steep. So I can definitely look back at that and say, I'm glad that I had that experience. I'm glad that I got the chance to see what I was capable of doing, but also recognize how challenging it is to do that at a high level, and probably know that, I probably wouldn't do that again unless there was a really good reason to.
Who and what bands and music are you influenced by?
So when I was growing up, I would say, the music that I was surrounded with by my parents was influential. Bands like the Beatles, Joni Mitchell, Led Zeppelin, Queen, the Charlie Brown, like holiday specials, like the music by Vince Guaraldi, George Winston, who is a new age piano player that both my parents were into. Um, Stuff like that. And then, as a teenager, I got really into guitar-based music because I was a guitar player. So I got really into progressive metal, new metal, progressive rock, bands like Tool, King Crimson, Rage Against the Machine, but then also like, more, I guess, popular rock bands like Coldplay or Radiohead. And then, as I got older, my taste kind of changed. I started getting more into different kinds of classical music, especially French Impressionism and minimalism. So artists like Steve Reich and Maurice Ravel, but also, contemporary or like 20th century-ish composers like Stravinsky. And then also, video game composers. There's a handful that were really influential, like Koji Kondo, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
Yasunori Mitsuda, who did Chrono Cross, Chrono Trigger.
What is the concept behind your latest album, Besides B Dies?
Yeah, so Besides B Dies is a collection of material that was written for various projects over the years, largely unused material, for various reasons. In some cases, the direction of the material didn't work, or there just wasn't a good place for it, or I ended up leaving the project. But what all the music on that album has in common is that it all sort of has a bit of a darker psychological element to it, because a lot of the projects it was written for, are things like thrillers, things that have that sort of element to it. And so I tried to create a concept album out of music from totally unrelated projects, which was a interesting challenge. And I also took the opportunity to create a full-length music video for the album, which was chance for me to learn a bit of how to do video effects and stuff like that. So that was pretty fun.